Good afternoon and welcome to SportWorks Talks. My name is Christian Page and with me today is Dominique Gobat. Good to see you, Dominic.
Thanks, Chris.
Great to have you back with us. I was thinking before, and we mentioned earlier, you're on our first podcast here at SportWorks.
That's correct, yeah.
Gosh, nearly over a year ago. And I remember at the time we said, we're going to have to get you back at some point and give us some more tips on what you do in terms of coaching and about personal branding. So we're grateful to have you back. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Chris, and Tatiana too, and the whole SportWorks team.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. So for everybody online, wonderful to have you with us. Thank you from wherever you are around the world. Please pop it into the chat. We'd like to see where you're from and where you're joining us from. We'd also say hello to the people in the room who've been able to join us this afternoon. Some great familiar faces. Hello, everyone. As always, we run the talk for about 20-25 minutes, and then we're going to have a bit of Q&A at the end. As we have the chat there, so please pop your questions in there as we go, and then when at the end we'll get to them and hopefully answer as many as we can. If we can't, we'll put them into the forum so you can continue the discussion. So greetings from New Delhi and from Hamburg and from Lausanne and Tokyo. So wonderful to see everybody joining us today. All right, I'm going to hand over to Dominic and we'll start his presentation. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Chris.
I'll get it ready. Oh, yes.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot. So, hello, everybody. Topic today, personal branding. What is all the fuss? So just a couple of things that we're going to cover over the next 20 minutes or so. First of all, understanding a little bit how the employment landscape has changed. Secondly, redefining work. This is really quite an important point to understand how it fits into the whole personal branding. And thirdly, what I've noted down is the U Incorporated, effectively what is personal branding and how you fit into the whole exercise. So when we look at the employment landscape and how it has changed, first on the left-hand side, when we're looking at risk, we're looking at the employer's or organization's potential concern, and that is what we refer to as hiring risk. Hiring risk is estimated at approximately half an annual salary when the wrong person is hired. And most job seekers, their concern is time. We all know how lengthy a job application process can take, whether it comes to writing a cover letter, CV, interview process, sourcing jobs, etc., etc. It's highly time consuming. And this leads to effectively a misalignment in terms of how organizations search for talent or people to employ, and typical job seeker, how they go about looking for their jobs. One of the key drivers for this change, or let's say that has influenced this change over the last 20, 30 years, is the internet and technology. It's opened up opportunities for jobs to globally. It's facilitated, let's say, how people can apply to jobs, and companies and organizations are typically overwhelmed. So I won't spend too much time on this, but it's really just to lay the foundation and explain a little bit why this is important, which I'll explain in a second. But basically, effectively, if we look at the typical job seeker, the majority of job seekers are looking at online postings. Okay, they may be talking to a few people, but primarily that is where they are looking for the opportunities. Companies or organizations, on the other hand, keeping in mind this hiring risk, that is a major concern. Some organizations are more aware of it than others, but when you start considering it, they want to be able to select talent or people that they know are going to get the job done and get the job done well. Okay, so typically what they're starting to look at is internal, giving promotion to internal people first and foremost, maybe an intern who's already been there for a few months. They know how he or she works, and external suppliers like agencies, placement agencies, who get to vet the applications first, and then very last, we're actually coming down to cold calling, spontaneous applications, and online job postings. So this is again, something to keep in mind. It's important. It fits significantly into the whole personal branding exercise and why we go about it, which I'm going to explain in a moment. Next slide. What we're talking about here is effectively that top part of the pyramid. From an organization's perspective, is what we're referring to as the hidden job market. In Switzerland, it's estimated between 65 and 75% of jobs are part of this hidden job market, which means either they are never advertised, or if they are advertised, they already know who they're hiring. All right. So as as a job seeker, if you're always looking at online advertising jobs only, you effectively are only touching the tip of the iceberg, which obviously limits your choices, right? And creates unprecedented competition, which doesn't make the job any easier. Moving on to the next significant component of understanding why personal branding is important is, how do we define work? Now, typically when we talk to people, we say, well, what is your definition of work? They talk about a lot of, let's say, results, tangible results coming out of work. So salary, for example. People say, oh, it's all about earning money. It's all about getting, developing oneself personally, about job satisfaction. It's about promotion. So they talk about these byproducts of work. But ultimately, if you can start to think of work as rather helping people and creating value for these individuals, you shift the mindset from your perspective to their perspective. And you're probably wondering, what has this got to do with personal branding? Well, it has everything to do with personal branding. When we start to look at personal branding, there are effectively three main components, steps of the process, and understanding how to demonstrate value, articulate value, highlight the importance of what you can offer to an organization, or maybe it's not an organization, maybe you're independent and you actually are trying to find your next job opportunity, your next project. When you can articulate how you can create value, then you grab people's attention. And this is one component of the personal branding exercise. The point that's really important, why we spoke about the change of the employment landscape, is you need to understand what companies are, where their pain points are, and what they're trying to mitigate, which is this aspect of hiring risk. So, fun fact, one of the first examples of personal branding, which is widely considered one of the first examples, was Julius Caesar, 2,000 years ago, approximately. Okay, so what Julius Caesar was doing is in Gaul, fighting the Gallic Wars. There was tension rising in Rome. His enemies wanted to overthrow him. So what he did was he wrote a book. He wrote a book in the third person. So he didn't say, I am so great. He said, he is so great. And he sent it back to Rome. And he was able to sway public opinion to influence the situation, the scenario, but basically protect himself. So this is, to an extent, one of the first examples of personal branding that we can observe. But as I said, it's just a fun fact, just to let you know that it hasn't been around for 20 years, 200 years, but more like 2,000 years. When we start to look at the process, typically people think, okay, personal branding is all about me. And yes, it is important. This is an important step. And this is one of the three, if we break it down into three components, this is one of the three steps. Critical, really, really important point. You're looking at your image, you're looking at your attributes, your skills. You may be taking into consideration cultural significance, age, gender, previous experience. You're also looking at your private experiences, your personal experience from a young age. How has that influenced you? When we're looking at personal branding, what we want is for you to take control of your career. Take control of the opportunities that are presented to you. We don't want you to be a passenger. We want you to be a driver. Okay, so to an extent, you become CEO of your own company, of your own product, which means you need to look after your image, you have to look after, you have a mission, values, vision, etc., etc. So this is a significant part of the process. One of the reasons for this is awareness. So when it comes to preparing for an interview, preparing for a networking event, preparing a cover letter or a CV, it's really important to have relevant information only. And the problem is we know ourselves so well that we often forget key information. And when we forget key information, well, then our message becomes less powerful and less relevant to the people that we are communicating with. Okay, so this is absolutely critical when it comes to the whole personal branding process, one of the three components, as I mentioned. The second component that arguably should even come first, but it really doesn't matter whether the first or second come in whichever order that they take, is you have to understand your target audience. Okay, so to use a famous expression, or famous, a very long, another really old expression saying, if you don't know where you want to go, no wind is favorable. And so often people will spend so much time on that first component, What can I do? What can I even what can I bring to an organization? What am I really good at? What is my passion? Often we hear about passion. Passion is great, but you have to be good at it. All right. So to use an example of a guitar player, somebody who really likes to play music doesn't mean they're going to make their money making music. Okay. So you need to also be able to differentiate hobbies, passion, from something that's relevant and realistic. But what's absolutely critical, as I mentioned, is knowing who you are talking to. And you can have multiple targets. That's absolutely okay as well. Of course, at some point, if you have too many, then it gets more complicated. And it's really important not to blur the message effectively. So it's really important to be able to talk clearly and concisely to one target or one group of organizations. Maybe it's an industry. Maybe it's a company, a specific organization. So I'll give you a concrete example. Here we are in the sport industry, very often talking to people, where would you like to work? The sport industry. Okay, great. Well, what does that mean exactly? Are you looking at a governing body? Are you looking at an international federation or national federation, continental federation? Are you looking at a sports agency? Are you looking at sporting goods? Are you looking at maybe using sport as a development tool? So looking at NGOs and intergovernmental organizations like UN agencies where they use sport. What do you mean by the sport industry? That's an example where people don't necessarily understand where they want to end up. It's really, really critical to know where you're going. The third component, which is also as important as the other two, there's no one part of the process that you can drop, is defining your message according to your target. Now, let me give you the example of Coca-Cola. I use Coca-Cola because it's easy to understand. Everybody knows the product. Many people drink it, one of the various forms. But to give you an example of defining the message and also defining the product. So again, we're talking about the branding diversification, which applies to an individual too. Coca-Cola in the 70s discovered, or they didn't discover, but they saw that the health and fitness industry was kicking off. So what did they do? They wanted to produce a quote-unquote healthier choice for those people that were more concerned about how much sugar they were consuming or how they looked, their physical appearance. So they generated Diet Coke or Coke Light. And of course, the two varied from country to country. Many countries rebranded Diet Coke to Coke Light when they understood that there was possibly a negative connotation with Diet Coke, with the word diet. But effectively what they did is they developed their message. The product remained very, very similar, but they developed their message according to who they were trying to reach out to. What happened towards the end of the 90s was they suddenly realized that a lot of men enjoyed drinking Diet Coke or wanted to drink Diet Coke because they were more health conscious. But they found Diet Coke or Coke Light too feminine. So they developed Coke Zero. Coke Zero, they rebranded it, dark label, stronger font for the zero, and they sold it. They released their Coke Zero. Now, that doesn't mean that women can't drink Coke Zero and men can't drink Coke Light, but just is an example of how the message and the product is packaged differently according to who you're trying to speak to. Okay? And personal branding is exactly the same. You cannot talk to one organization the same way as you talk to another. Okay? You have to diversify your message. You have to be clear on what value you will bring that organization. And this is now you start hopefully seeing the reason why we try and redefine what we call how we refer to work, how we look at work. And if you start looking at it through the eyes of who you're trying to talk to, it unveils a lot of interesting facts. And very often, one of the challenges people have when they start looking at their own profile and their own personal brand is they try and give all the information and all the things they've ever done. But a lot of that information is not relevant. So it's absolutely critical to be able to cut where to keep the information as relevant as possible to the group that you're speaking to. So those are effectively the three steps. Just a few more things which often people forget about. When we talk about personal branding, a lot of people are thinking, it's all about digital, it's all about offline, but it's a balance. It's a balance between the two areas. You want to have balance between offline and online. The lines between offline and online are more and more blurred. By online, we're not just talking about LinkedIn. Maybe LinkedIn could work, but maybe it's more about writing a thought piece for a online journal. Maybe it's about being on Instagram, if that makes sense to you. So these are the sort of processes that you have to go through, and you have to think about what actually makes sense. Where is my audience, my target, consuming or potentially could consume my message to recognize me as either somebody who can generate value, an expert in my industry, or whatnot. Now, of course, the personal branding exercise in itself is incredibly complex. We can, two individuals are never the same for some of the reasons I mentioned. We're talking about cultural context, age, experience linked with age, gender, skills and abilities, a wide range of different components, and you bring all those together and everybody is unique in one way or another. So that's why it's so important really to be able to get this clear and be able to clearly articulate the why and again how you generate that value. I think it's also just important to mention that when we talk about value, it's not action. Value is not the actions you do, but it's the intangible that is left behind. It's why you're hired or fired if the value is not identified and clearly appreciated. So that's quite important. Just a few closing notes just to summarize. So first of all, as I mentioned, you've got to know your target. Absolutely critical. Second, you have to engage with people. You cannot prepare or go through the process of looking at your personal branding and then just leaving it to work for itself. You have to be actively engaging with people and actively engaging with professionals. Thirdly, you have to spread your actions. You cannot just rely on one set of actions. You have to be prepared to mix it up a bit. You have to decide which channels you want to target, as we spoke about LinkedIn, maybe Instagram, but also physical channels. So conferences, maybe it's lunches and coffees or whatnot. You need to be prepared to embrace new tools and technologies. There's a lot of interesting stuff that is constantly emerging. Don't be afraid to try something new. You need to be able to try something new to differentiate yourself from the pack, from everybody else, right? You need to build relationships. It's not about asking for things. It's about building sustainable relationships so that maybe you can help that other person or vice versa. So it's not about taking. It's about building relationships and having that exchange. You need to understand the industry. So this goes back to knowing your market. But very often people forget to look at the bigger industry trends. And last but not least, if you are the CEO of your own company, if you are going to take control of your career and drive it, not be a passenger, you have to be prepared to take risks. If you're not prepared to take risks, you are going to struggle. And by risks, obviously risks mean different things to different people. It may be more extreme or less extreme. It doesn't mean doing something totally off the grid, but you have to be prepared to push the envelope and try different things that others are not doing. Absolutely critical. Now, just to finish the presentation, and I think I'm more or less on time, which is a first for me. I'm going to end off on a bit more of a somber note. There was a book that was written by an Australian nurse, Bronnie Ware, The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. And these are just 3 examples she wrote a 4 book, so this is just 3 extracts from this book of some of the things she heard over and over again. So I think this is something that's really, really powerful for me at any rate. If you want to be a driver of your career and you want to, if you think about how much time you spend in the office and in the work environment, compared to the time, once you've taken away sleeping and eating and actual time for yourself, you really want to take control and you don't want to leave things up to fate or various things that are out of your control. Of course, it doesn't mean everything's simple. It doesn't mean it's a walk in the park once you've gone through the process. You have to keep evaluating. You have to keep going back. You have to keep challenging yourself and asking yourselves questions. But at the end of the day, you want to drive your own professional career forward, and you don't want to be relying on others. I heard a comment from a speaker several years ago at the Maison du Sport in Lausanne, and he said something really pertinent, which I thought was really interesting. He said, if you get to a point in your career and you think it's time to leave or time to move on, it's too late. You already should have made that move. So thank you very much for your time. I'll be happy to field any questions that you may have. I hope it's been informative or given you at least something to think about. It's a super complex topic that can take hours and days and months and weeks. And as I said, you've got to keep going back to review it and to challenge yourself. But at least it gives you a taste of what personal branding is all about.
Perfect.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chris.
Very, very good. Great insights and great tips. Really valuable. The first thing you raised, which I really appreciated, was that interesting tip about the 65 to 75% of jobs aren't advertised or it's self-cultivated, which is an amazing statistic when you consider, how much effort goes into just focusing on that, probably the tip of the iceberg. I remember some time ago, a friend of mine said, if you're going to go for a job, why not put the energy and effort into something you want to do and really focus? From your experience, creating that definition, if you like, of where you want to go, how does that work for people in terms of their driving their decision making, do you find?
So you're more talking about the influencing factors in terms of how
do we, because quite often you mentioned at the end there about fate and how fate can guide us and we kind of left it to drift. But if we can focus on a career path and focus on, that other 65 to 75% going after those, maybe there's a greater opportunity.
Yeah. Well, I think that's where personal branding definitely plays a big role.
Yep.
It's about giving you structure to be able to tap into that 65 to 75%. But when we're talking about the 65 to 75, effectively what we need is a critical component, which I touched on, but I didn't go into much detail about, is networking. Okay. Now, personally, I'm not a big fan of the word networking because people understand it as something that it really isn't. Yeah. So when we talk about networking to a lot of people, they imagine that it's going out there, meeting people and asking for something. Yeah. And it's really about relationship building. So instead of networking, I prefer to say relationship building. I use networking because everybody hears it over and over again, but effectively that's absolutely critical. And very often people start to do it when it's too late. So they start to do it when they need something, and then they're desperate, and people feel that. So it's about nurturing those professional relationships, but also private relationships, because often people, when they're looking for an opportunity, they forget that their family and their support structure are actually also possibly a strong source of opportunity.
And great support.
And great support, absolutely. Yeah. That's absolutely important point, because very often the process grinds people down, which means you need that support, right? But to tap into that 65 to 75% of the hidden job market, you have to have that. You have to have the relationships, and that's not unique to Switzerland. No, that exists everywhere. So people who go, but that's Switzerland, what's it like in other countries? I don't have the stats for every country, but the hidden job market does exist. And that is driven by this aspect of hiring risk.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. And that's an interesting point. I hadn't had that explained, that hiring risk element. So it's a really key point. Thank you. So we've got some questions coming in. Thank you from the Gold Coast. Your insights are valuable and grateful. Thanks, Niti. So what's the main points of difference for professional and entrepreneurs in personal branding?
That's a really good question. I think the key aspect would be really it depends. Well, first of all, your target, okay, and what you're trying to achieve. Okay. So for an entrepreneur, for example, typically that entrepreneur will be looking at new business leads, possibly new opportunities, and opportunities can mean a lot of different things for a lot of different people. So an entrepreneur, an opportunity could be my next project, or it could be the next mandate for my company, my startup. For an individual, the next opportunity could be the job or internal promotion. So that's something we haven't spoken about either. But personal branding is not, if you're happy in your job and you're loving the company you're working for and the job function that you're doing, personal branding also supports you in the process internally to maybe get the next opportunity. Maybe it's a lateral change, maybe it's a vertical change. So I think the key things for between entrepreneurs and people already in employment, first of all, it's the target, but it's also comes back to the value and what you generate. And that comes back to looking at your own personal DNA, professional DNA, and extracting the relevant information. But ultimately, the process itself is very similar. Yeah.
Just a question of thought that just propped up was around, okay, we're facing challenging times in terms of job markets and so on. And I guess for many independent consultants and freelancers, and a lot of the sport industry is built on that support, if you like. So personal branding, it's great to hear it's not just about me. I think it's again great takeaway for me. It's like how do you differentiate self-promotion from overdoing it? There is a balance there. So how do you coach on that one?
Yeah, so that's a really good point. And this is going to maybe sound overly simplified in my response, but it's about being authentic.
Yes.
So if it doesn't feel right, it probably isn't.
Yeah.
Now, that's also a bit tricky because some people feel more comfortable by talking to people than others.
Yep.
So in that case, when I'm talking to people, I'm like, baby steps. Start slow. Reach out set yourself an objective. Maybe you chat to one person a week. Maybe you start with people you know really well.
Yep.
And you just get the dialogue going. Okay. But yeah, no, you're right. It can become too much very quickly. But if you go properly through the process and you actually understand what value you can generate, what their needs are, what value you can generate to help respond to those needs, and you've understood your own professional DNA, then it becomes relevant. And if it becomes relevant, it's no longer too much.
I think, keyword, authenticity. I think it's great. I mean, I personally am quite introverted. I don't like going out and meeting people. I'm, this socially, but I don't mind presenting. But it is that opposite. It's always true. So it is about baby steps and risky. I think that combination.
Absolutely.
So we had a question from the audience. How would you use LinkedIn for networking?
Yeah, that's a
good question. Thanks.
Yeah, that is a great question, and it's a difficult question to answer because it's so personal as well. There are a few techniques, let's say, to avoid it becoming too much or not authentic. I think one of the problems with using LinkedIn is that we see it as our only go-to platform for these opportunities, and very often we use LinkedIn when it's too late. So if we look at it as the sustainable relationship building, when you do reach out to somebody in LinkedIn, or hopefully no longer on LinkedIn, but you already have that contact with them, then it's much more organic and it's much more authentic. So I guess my key message here would be, if you're going to use LinkedIn, you only use it very early in the process, where you can already start creating those leads and those relationships before you actually need them. And again, when I talk about relationship building, you've also got to think that maybe they won't help you, but you will help them. So when you get into this sharing of support to each other, it becomes much more less overbearing and over the top. The reason why I say LinkedIn is tricky is because very often people jump into LinkedIn, they send a message and they say, I want to connect. And then people go, okay, why are you connecting with me? And then there's a whole possibly hidden agenda that is uncovered. And typically some of the advice I would give is, just keep it general. Obviously, get in touch with people a lot earlier before you actually need anything. Keep it general. Don't ask for a job. Absolutely not. That's not the idea of it. It's about that really authentic relationship building, if that makes sense.
No, definitely. I think great tip on that one. Two key ones: authenticity and not overdo it. Keep it real. Okay, so a couple more questions. So one here from Ana Sofia Rodriguez. Thank you, Ana. Today we make a lot of connection on social networks. Do you think that the message must be different in our different social networks?
Yeah, that's also a good question. Then it also depends how you find social networks, because we have messaging on certain social networks. There are certainly restrictions and limitations in place depending on the social network platform. But no, I don't think the message has to be different per se. But then what may be impacted is more what your limitations are on each social networking platform. And for me, I think digital is important, but it doesn't mean you have to be everywhere. You have to create that balance, and you have to be in relevant channels only. So that's why I use the example of Instagram and LinkedIn. And maybe you need to just be in one and not the other. Maybe it's Facebook. Maybe it's something different. Maybe it's not social media at all, but maybe it's more developing content. So you get your name seen and people start saying, oh, that's interesting. So I'll give you a little example. I was hearing a lot of people saying, oh, I would like to work in the area of positive impact. Okay, great. What have you done that either professionally or personally in terms of your interests that would let's say qualify you to work in this area? Because again, if you look at the competition, there are a lot of people that want to work in positive impact. So maybe an example is to start creating a blog and starting contributing and sharing your thoughts. It's a simple example, but it's just to say, when you do go for a job interview, or you start to talk to people and they say, well, what have you done? You say, well, I've had a blog for the last 24 months and I've been sharing this and that and taking case studies, etc., etc. Doesn't have to be something super complicated. That's just a simple idea that, just to get you in the right direction.
It supports one of your other points about taking risks, because it does take a risk to have an opinion, and it does take a risk to draft and put something out there in the world, whether it be a blog. So it's another baby step towards that, I guess.
Absolutely.
Nice connection. A couple more questions in here. So one here from Manuela Biz. Thank you, Manuela. You affirmed the context is something important to be considered. What features in context should we pay attention on when we change from country to another to start building relations again? Yeah, it's a tough one.
Yeah, that's a very tough question. I mean, that's obviously very contextual and cultural. And I've discussed with a lot of people actually in the past where they say, but back home where I come from, it's Mexico, for example. We don't go about networking or relationship building the same way as you do in Europe. And I'm not going to pretend that I know how you go about building these relationships and the context of each country. I'm more or less familiar with Switzerland because I've been here for 18 years. I'm familiar with South Africa, having grown up there. But I'm not going to pretend to give you the answer for all different countries. But you have to understand the context and the culture. And if you're new to a country, then there is a learning phase that you go through, an achieving process. And that's actually okay. And I think when we go back to this component of risk taking, there may always be criticism from people, and that's okay. Criticism is your friend. It's not a negative. It shouldn't be seen as a negative. And if you can get around that, then you will only get stronger and better at whatever you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, great tip, and then a great point about when you going into a new country. I know we're fortunate in that we travel the world delivering major sport events, but I always say the first thing I need to learn is how they do it in this country. If I'm going to try and deliver a games or a major event, I've got to learn how to do it locally. So it is important for that context.
Yeah,
completely agree. So another question here: any big differences for personal branding women working in the sport industry? That's quite specific.
That's very specific as well.
That one.
So I touched on gender in the presentation. I didn't actually go into the sport industry when I was thinking about gender. Other industries, gender actually can play a significant role. For example, let's say more of a technical industry, where the industry is trying to increase gender balance. A woman in the industry will have an advantage, obviously fitting the right skill set and experience and all the rest, over somebody with a similar profile who's maybe a male. So that's why I'm saying gender is important. Gender can also be if you flip it the other way around, can also be seen as a handicap. Okay, depending on the industry. If you're a man in manufacturing or technology and you want to get a job and you know that they have a specific mandate to increase gender equality, then you know you're in a disadvantage. So when you're looking at the professional DNA, it's not about saying what's right or wrong. It's about creating awareness. Because of course you're not going to go into an interview and say you should hire me because of my gender, but it does create awareness so that if your gender could be playing against you or playing in your favor, then you need to adapt your message accordingly, leaning on the other professional aspects. So I would say it's not one specific thing, it's a combination of things, and it's really about generating awareness. It's a very complex question. It's a great question, but it's really complex.
You've mentioned a couple of times in here about understanding your career DNA. And is there, again, it's a point of reference, understanding how to develop that, or what are the tools available, or is there something you can help with? Because understanding what that is, and then obviously that helps research what is required for pitching for a job, for example.
Yeah.
What processes are there available online or otherwise to support people in defining what their DNA is? What does that mean?
Yeah, so there are a few frameworks that are out there. There's Business Model U, that's one example. There's the Personal Branding Canvas, and Personal Branding Canvas is actually a free tool that you can access, developed in Milan, if I'm not mistaken, built off the Business Model U canvas that has been modified slightly.
That's a business model canvas that was developed here by the Swiss.
Exactly.
From EPFL.
Correct. Exactly.
Yeah,
so that was developed. That was for organizations and startups.
Okay.
Business Model U is then a spin-off of Business Model,
Fantastic.
the Business Model Canvas,
Yeah.
Adapted to the individual.
Great.
And then the Personal Branding Canvas was one step further. So you've got these different canvases that are free to use. Other options is to obviously hire somebody to get feedback. And the idea of a coach in this context is not to give you the answers, because I think the key thing to remember is you are the best person to know what you bring to the table. A coach in this case is somebody who's going to more challenge you and say, well, is that really something you want to put forward or not? The actual process itself, once everything's together, especially when it comes to developing that message, and making sure that whatever you're communicating is relevant. But those are the two tools that are online and free.
Okay, we'll pop them into the notes on this presentation. So a couple more questions come through here from Nitya. Sorry, I apologize in advance for the bad pronunciation of your name. From Nitya, when you've been putting yourself out there for so long, it can feel safe to connect online versus personally, picking up the phone. How can we reduce the perceived fear of connecting again? The fear of picking up the phone again.
Yeah, so it's a really good question, because I think it's, when it comes to the digital sphere, we get so used to interacting with people without that personal, exactly, and it's so fast. And interestingly, I gave a workshop 2 years ago to a group of students, adults, and I said to them in the class, what is the most effective form of communication? And they was like, oh, but in person, voice to communicate. I was like, voice, okay. Yeah. And then a few months later, observing how they were connecting with people, it was all digital. Nobody was picking up the phone. So I think it's a really great question, because people do have that fear of getting in touch. On one hand, they feel that they are exposing themselves. The other concern is they're not quite sure what they're going to say. So there's a message that's got to be absolutely key. And if you're asking for something, that is a problem, right? You need to be able to do that proactively before you get to the point. I mean, I think thirdly, no, that's pretty much it. It's just taking that risk and getting out there.
And it is about baby steps. I think you've said it numerous times. It's just, test yourself. Find safe people you can call.
Yeah.
I remember learning how to do cold calls years ago. And I was a telemarketer at one point in my life. And I remember the coaching that we got, and it was great, because it was like, well, okay, call your friends first, because if you can call them, then you can start to build your confidence. Maybe that's a tip. I don't know. Maybe it's an idea. It worked well for me that time. So we've got time for one more question here, coming from Cristiane Ferreira. Thanks for your question. Any tips on expanding and strengthening the network on these social distancing COVID times? Yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah, it is a good question, and I think it's again got to do a lot with culture and context, because there are certain countries that are, let's say, more loose in the social distancing than others. I know in Switzerland we can meet people. We've been able to meet people since the confinement, as long as we were staying in groups of less than 5. I mean, a lot of people were respecting that, but still, it's never been a major problem per se. For 2 months, people were staying very much at home, but since May, restaurants have opened up, and obviously gradually things have become more and more loose. But depending on your country, that obviously can be a challenge. I mean, my suggestion would be think out of the box when it comes to online networking. So instead of offering, I'll give you a funny example. I attended a workshop back in March and couldn't attend it in person because of COVID. So at the very beginning of the session, we were all connecting virtually from different parts of the world. And the person driving the meeting said, does everybody have their coffee? And everybody lifted the coffee up, and it just broke the ice. It just created something a little bit more natural that we would have done in a physical environment, right? Yeah. So I think with that in mind, if you go with that idea of risk-taking, trying something different, instead of saying to somebody, because you can't, of course, let's go for lunch or a drink or whatnot, or coffee, say, hey, let's have a virtual coffee. Yeah. I'm oversimplifying it, of course, but the idea is think differently, think out of the box, challenge the norm. And again, if you go back to the first question of, LinkedIn, one of the first questions, LinkedIn and how to approach LinkedIn, very often people are like, let me connect, I want to call, I want, I would like to this and that, whatever it is. Yeah. So instead of reaching out to somebody and saying this and that, say, listen, I'm really, really curious about your industry, your organization. Give them 2 lines about yourself. Let's have a virtual drink.
Nice.
It's different. And that's what grabs people's attention. You got to think differently, think out of the box and take risks.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Thank you, everybody. I don't know if there's any more questions in the room. Nothing. Great. Well, look, we're at time. Wonderful to have you with us, Dominic. Thanks, you. Chris. Some great insights. Always a pleasure to have you and see you here. And thank you, all of you, for joining us online. And thank you for your great questions. And I see it's Niti. So thank you very much. And I apologize for getting the pronunciation wrong. It was great to have you all with us. As always, all of the questions and answers will go out on our forum at sportworker.com, which is a again, another platform or an opportunity for you to connect with people within the sport industry. And it's specifically, our focus here is about giving content that is specific to our industry to support the people who work in sport. So if you have any suggestions or any requests, we always put it back to you and say, let us know. How can we serve you and add value to what you're doing in your day? So thank you all for being with us. Great to have you with us, Dominic.
Thanks again.
And we'll see you again soon. Cheers and bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Stay safe.